Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 18th of January 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, director of Diablo 3 Jay Wilson steps down from his role. Sources claim that Sony will be ditching the DualShock design for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation Mobile to get free weekly games. Dean Hall, creator of DayZ, speaks out on the responsibility of consumers as well as the War Z. And UK Wii U ad pulled by the Advertising Standards Authority due to misinformation. After 7 years of working on the Diablo 3 project, game director Jay Wilson has decided to step down and move to another area within the company. This was announced by him in a blog post, where he also went on to acknowledge creative differences with the community and his quote, "many mistakes in managing the relationship between fans and the company." While there is no specific information as to where he will be moving to, I believe it's most likely a safe bet that he will be involved in some way with the forthcoming Project Titan, which is rumored to be a massively multiplayer first-person shooter, although that rumor has been going around for the last 2 years and there's very little more information on the subject at this time. Unfortunately for him, it would appear that Jay Wilson leaves behind him a legacy of many fans that were disappointed in the direction that Diablo 3 went in, a healthy amount of criticism across the internet, as well as, of course, his now infamous bust-up with the previous Diablo designer, David Brevik. For those who don't remember, David Brevik was, of course, a designer on Diablo 2 and extremely influential throughout the series when he was with Blizzard North, and in an interview with Ink Gamers described that Blizzard South made some decisions with the loot system that were very different than the way we did it in Diablo 2, and I think that obviously the community has been upset with some of the decisions they made. Having all your powers work off your main weapon and things like that, to having blues that are more powerful than yellows, eventually the auction house and how that worked, even something as simple as when you equip an item and it's bound to your character permanently, would have totally changed the dynamic of the game. Technical artist at Blizzard South Chris Hager posted on Facebook that he felt that he had been thrown under the bus by that interview, at which point Jay Wilson follows up with a post that quite succinctly says, "Fuck that loser," in reference, of course, to David Brevik, one of the guys that made the entire Diablo series happen. Needless to say, people weren't really all that happy with it. Not surprising, is it not? I mean, this is the guy that got very special thanks in the credits of Diablo 3, alongside names like Max Schaefer and Eric Schaefer. You should of course know them by their works. They are responsible for Runic and Torchlight. When you put on that list alongside Bill Roper and Brian Kelly as well, this guy's kind of important, right? You know, this guy's been recognized for essentially creating the Diablo franchise. So when the person who essentially masterminded a lot of the changes that people did not like to the series in Diablo 3 turns around and says, well, screw that guy, we don't care, then that is not exactly going to go well, is it? Well, of course it's not going to go well. I'm actually kind of surprised that he was able to stay on. I am very shocked that Blizzard did not actually fire him, or at least demote him for that, because that blew up all over the internet. It was a PR disaster across the board. Now, I have no love for Diablo 3. I've expressed it time and time and time again. A game that did not live up to its predecessors and was built from the very start to be exploited for monetary gain with the real money auction house. Add to that the lack of LAN, the always-on DRM, the no true single-player mode, and of course the months of boring disaster, aka Inferno, and of course broken promises such as lack of PvP, and you have a recipe for a bad game arrogantly managed and put out there to exploit the legacy of the previous games. It's really my solid opinion on Diablo 3. I feel that Torchlight 2 is, for the most part, a better game. Diablo 3 does have smoother combat, I'll certainly admit that. You can cast everything on the move in Diablo, whereas you cannot do that in Torchlight, but quite frankly, that is the only thing I feel that Diablo has over a far superior title, and a far cheaper one as well. $20 to no real money auction house with real single player, real LAN versus that, yeah, that wins every time. I certainly wish him the best of luck in his future projects, but hopefully he'll not be put in a position where he's allowed to talk publicly all that much. According to information acquired by CVG, supposedly from a senior game studio source working within Sony, it is very likely that the DualShock controller design will be scrapped for the PlayStation 4, with Sony prototyping a large number of different designs, very few of which actually resemble the rather classic pad. As regards to what this pad will actually be, there is little information on what kind of shape and ergonomic performance we could expect from such a thing, but it would appear that new prototypes include biometric sensors on the grips, as well as an LCD touchscreen. It's fairly likely that technology from the PlayStation Vita, such as the rear touch panel, will of course be considered for this device by Sony. And as previously covered on this show, it looks fairly likely that we will be seeing a full PlayStation 4 announcement prior to E3, and most likely before Microsoft is able to announce its new product. There are still rumors circulating that this announcement will actually occur in February, but we have yet to get any solid confirmation on anything like that, so it's safe to assume that it won't. So let me put my opinion this way. There is a fine line to be drawn between innovation and arrogance. When you have something that works incredibly well and is considered by many to be one of the best controller designs ever made, then the last thing you want to do is try to include new technologies and vastly change things around when you have absolutely no evidence that the market actually wants that at all. And if you're looking towards touch panels, then you've got to think, well, one, what do I plan on doing with this thing, and will developers actually use it in any real way? And secondly, do I have any success on record with this kind of technology? Now, the answer to question 2 is no, you don't. The PlayStation Vita has a rear touch panel. Would that be considered a success right now? No. Is there an obvious desire for people to have a front and rear touch screen on their device? Well, no. I'm a PlayStation Vita owner, and quite frankly, I have noticed very few instances where the touchscreen has been anything but a hindrance. The browser experience with the PS Vita, for instance, is freaking awful, and you would think the touchscreen would really help there, but it actually doesn't. As regards to the rear touchscreen, it's barely ever used. There are very few games that use it, and the ones that do don't generally do it very well. There are very specific circumstances where it can be used, like the creation of new tracks quickly in Mod Nation races. That kind of makes sense, because you can shape the track with the back without putting your fingers on the touchscreen and obscuring the view. That's pretty good, considering that the PS Vita screen is not that big. And honestly, you're not going to have a bigger display than that on a controller unless you go full-on Wii U, which seems highly unlikely. Even the Wii U's display within its tablet controller is not considered all that good. It's not multi-touch for one thing, it's optimally operated, especially when it comes down to the keyboard, with a stylus rather than your fingers, which means that the actual speed you can type in is fairly low. There are certain circumstances where it can be used for large buttons and things like that, which is pretty cool, but I don't want this kind of stuff in my controller. I especially don't want them changing the DualShock. The DualShock is probably one of my favorite controllers ever. I think the only change that really needs to be done to it is to make the back triggers a little bit easier to grip. It got to the point where they actually had to release these kind of plastic pro grips in order to modify your controller to make sure your fingers didn't slip off the bloody triggers at the back. But why change it? Why fix what isn't broken, one has to wonder. It's a very comfortable controller, it's a very accurate controller, it's just generally very well designed. It also has a better D-pad than the 360's ever has, so as far as I'm concerned, it is the superior controller. I am extremely concerned that what we're seeing from these rumors about the PS4 and the Xbox 720 or whatever is that they're not focusing on additional power all that much. Yes, these systems are going to be more powerful, but rumors are circulating that these things are going to be the kind of systems that could run Battlefield 3 on medium settings at 1080p. That's not impressive. That's not even close to being impressive. What I want to see is a major step up in power so that we can actually have better game development over the next few years, and so that PC gaming won't be held back by consoles. And if this is going to be a smaller leap than the previous generation, then I'm seriously worried that that won't happen. Especially if they're focusing on different technologies, like, ooh, let's have more Kinect. Let's not have more Kinect. Kinect is rubbish. The technology is great, but the games are awful for it. It's very, very limited use when it comes to any kind of core gamer. PlayStation moves a little bit better, but you don't even need to integrate that into the system. That could be a separate peripheral and it can work just fine, so that's not really too concerning. But if they're going for things like biometrics and nonsense like that, especially touchscreens, you know, I don't see the use for that really at all. It's a little bit worrying. And I'm hoping that they won't stray too far from an already proven design. I think the best thing they could possibly do with it is to integrate a small rear touchscreen into a DualShock design and not even worry about what's on the front of the pad. Who wants to look at the pad? Explain that to me. Who wants to look at the bloody pad? Unless it is a tablet-sized device, nobody looks at the pad. It's stupid. You look at the game on the screen. A rear touchscreen makes sense because you can use it for additional buttons and a few other pieces of functionality, but again, probably going to be limited use. Most developers most likely will not bother with it. So it seems like a whole bunch of tech for no real reason, and here's hoping that they do in fact focus on raw power in the system rather than silly gimmicks. Well, at least there's something from Sony that isn't a silly gimmick. It's been announced that PlayStation Mobile will be getting free weekly games. The PlayStation Mobile market is currently available on Android HTC devices, some Sony smartphones such as the Xperia, as well as tablets and the PlayStation Vita. Now, they're looking to incentivize the use of this marketplace because most people aren't doing it, and as a result, they will be offering a free PlayStation Mobile game every week on a Wednesday for the next 6 weeks. The first game, by the looks of it, will be Samurai Beatdown, which is a fairly decent game, and those of you who happen to be using PlayStation Vitas can be happy to say that you're going to get yet more free games, which you're already getting a fair amount of if you happen to be subscribed to PlayStation Plus. These games don't look awful, they're certainly not amazing, but we are looking at stuff like Jetpack Joyride and so on and so forth, the kind of thing that you can play on a smartphone, but it'll probably perform a little bit better on a dedicated gaming device. So there's nothing really wrong with that. You know, you can't say, oh, well, this is a terrible idea. Well, it's not a terrible idea. It's a nice idea. We get free stuff. Why would we complain about that? So I would suggest that you go and check out the PlayStation Mobile Market. If you go to your PlayStation Store on the Vita and then you hit PlayStation Mobile, which I believe is the third or fourth tab to the right, then you should see a bunch of games which are fairly familiar to those of you using mobile devices, and you can pick up Samurai Beatdown for free for the next few days. The creator of DayZ, Dean Rocket Hall, has spoken out on PC Game Zen on the subject of consumer responsibility, as well as some rather dodgy reports about the War Z in the media and his anger about that particular title. This all stems from a recent AMA that was done over on reddit.com/r/DayZ, in which one of the contributors questioned exactly what Dean Hall meant when he said that he wanted gamers to behave like rational consumers. The explanation from Dean's side is that he doesn't blame consumers individually for the decisions they're making, but he does challenge them to consider the impact of their decisions. If gamers pay out for games which underdeliver, they can only expect to put up with similar or worse treatment from developers in the future, is the interpretation that PC Game Zen puts on it, and it's hard to disagree with that, honestly. That is exactly what I've been pushing for frickin' ages. If you buy bad games, people will make more bad games. You can't just keep rewarding companies for bad behavior because they will continue to behave badly. Dean also expressed his anger at the War Z, saying, I am angry about the War Z, I'm very angry. I'm quite hurt personally because anyone can see how similar the words are while the average gamer knows the difference. Individual people don't. I've had family members and close friends mistake the difference and confront me about what they believed was unethical behavior they thought I was making. Classic case of passing off and trademark problems, isn't it? This is the reason, of course, why the War Z got its trademark suspended, because it was too much like other products. It's not only like DayZ, it's also like World War Z. And come on, it's a double whammy of disillusionment. It's super dodgy business practice, and I've spoken so much about the War Z already, but this all links together quite nicely. Yeah? Now, let me make a point. I coined a phrase a couple of days ago that I really like, and I'm going to use it because it's awesome, and it's called the desperation genre. Now, the reason I call games like the War Z and to some degree DayZ, as well as stuff like Towns and maybe even Dwarf Fortress and early on Minecraft, I wouldn't say any more, but early on stuff like Minecraft, these were desperation genres, and this means that you had an awful lot of people jumping on these genres because they desperately wanted something very specific. Gamers were looking for a particular experience that the market did not provide, so as soon as a game comes out that does, even if it does it really badly, they jump upon it, and they're actually willing to staunchly defend it and actively ignore bad gameplay elements or bad business practices because they are so desperate to have a game like that. This is the kind of thing that the guys who defend the War Z do. They have a massive case of confirmation bias, huge amounts of cognitive dissonance. These guys actively ignore flaws. They actively go out of their way to explain them away, to ignore them, and never, ever, ever hold the developer to account. Why? Because they are so desperate for an experience like that that they will accept any old crap. They really, really will. And this is the desperation genre. It's a similar reason why so many people defend Towns, even though Towns had a lot of problems. All credit to the Towns guys after their awful launch on Greenlight, which was clearly not ready. They are making efforts to improve it, but it's still nowhere near the standard that I would expect from a game released on Steam. But once again, that's a desperation genre. Why? Because it takes a lot of principles from Dwarf Fortress, and it makes them, let's just say, usable. Because Dwarf Fortress is not an easy game. It's a very difficult game to get into. There's another game called No Moria that does exactly the same thing. And people are so desperate to get a Dwarf Fortress-like experience that they will excuse this kind of stuff. And it goes on and on and on. It extends to various different subgenres and things like that. And we as consumers must be more responsible, and we must at some point be able to set aside our individual desires in order to look at the kind of impact our decisions actually have. If we give a bunch of money to people like Hammerpoint, people that have been proven time and again to be liars, dishonest, and engaging in terrible business practices, if we keep giving people like that money, then more companies will spring up to exploit us. They will look for the next desperation genre, and they will prey upon people that are looking for titles in that genre. That is an awful idea. This is bad for everybody. You don't have to be crazy into boycotts or anything like that. You've just got to think a little bit before you engage in giving money to a company that clearly isn't all it claims to be. This is the thing, isn't it? As a consumer, you have to have a balance, because you can't spend all day worrying about which video games you're buying. That's just stupid. It's still just video games. Some of us are in the industry, and we have a vested interest in the health of that industry, right? But there are many, many more people that are just out there to play video games, and they want particular experiences. But there is a balance to be struck. You don't have to either be completely apathetic or be a consumer that is campaigning for justice 100% of the time. There is a middle ground that you can hold, and it just involves thinking a little bit about the people that you give your money to. As regards to the media's pre-alpha reports on WarZ, I don't even know what the hell they were doing. Seriously. I've read some of that stuff, and it is garbage. It is utter garbage. I don't know what build they were shown. I don't know what happened there, but I can tell you this for a fact, it's never good whenever that happens, because we, as the media, have a responsibility not to deliberately mislead people. And we should also not mislead people through flagrant ignorance. I mean, I played WarZ, and it was blatantly awful. And I gave you 50 minutes of reasons why. There was no way that the pre-alpha was any better than that. No way. And honestly, anyone with any experience in PC gaming should have been able to identify exactly what the WarZ was from the very get-go. And there should not have been that kind of hype behind it generated by media organizations. The people that are responsible for that should be ashamed of themselves. And finally, a Wii U ad in the UK has been pulled by the UK's Advertising Standards Authority over the fact that certain games do not support the gamepad display mode. Now, what I'm actually talking about here is the ability to take your game from the television screen and put it onto the tablet controller, which allows the rest of the family to use the television for other means. Some consumers complained that this ad was misleading because there are only certain games which actually support this feature rather than all of them. It was believed by some consumers that this would work with any game. However, there are plenty of examples of games where this does not work, including, of course, Zombie U. In response to this, Nintendo of Europe issued a statement saying that it had no control over how third-party software developers used the capabilities, and did not believe the average consumer viewing the ad would believe that the feature was available on all games. A comment was also made by Clearcast, which is an advertising analytical agency, and they said there was nothing in the ad that implied all featured functions would be available on all games, as this would be entirely dependent on the game's publishers and not the console manufacturer. The pulling of this ad has generated some controversy on the basis that it would appear there was only actually one complaint lodged, and yet the Advertising Standards Authority made a ruling on the basis of a sole complaint, which is very rare. So for those who don't know, there is a very specific department in the UK which deals with the fairness of advertising, and it tries to protect consumers from misleading advertising. And it has the authority to pull ads from the air if these ads are deemed to be misleading. Usually it takes a hell of a lot more than one complaint to do it, way more than that, but they are mandated to investigate every single one of them, and it seems that they determined on the basis of this that it was misleading. I personally don't agree at all. It clearly isn't. I mean, especially when you actually watch the ad, it's got Zombie U in it. And the functionality is not demonstrated in Zombie U, it's only demonstrated in Super Mario Bros. So Yeah, I don't know about that. I think that, quite frankly, they have messed this up completely, and my hope is that this is swiftly sorted out, because I don't feel it was a particularly fair judgment at all. Okay, folks, that is me done for the week. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Have a safe and wonderful weekend, please, and I will see you next time.